1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Câte minute mai sunt, Florin?
Nu mai vorbi de ea.
În 30 secunde poți să trimiteți.
Nu mai vorbi deloc. În 10 secunde intră live, da? Deci nu mai ești acolo, nu mai vorbești, da?
Ok, trebuie să ies.
9, 8. So, joy.
I should have seen it like that.
So, hello Behzad, and welcome to Iaşi, and thank you very much for accepting to participate in this exhibition, which has a title which has a lot to do with your regular work. The title is Micro-Narratives, or the translation in Romanian of something in English which is Micro-Narratives. We would like maybe to have a little discussion with you about what micro-narratives, like how you use this term in your practice, in your regular practice, and maybe later on we can develop some kind of dialogue if possible. So thank you very much again for accepting this, and also for accepting to make a little interview with us.
Thank you very much. Pure pleasure to be here. I really like the title. Micro-narratives, of course, is very important. I really like to, I think it's very crucial to think about the micro-narrations. And it's very important to think that how is it possible to bring the notion of micro-history and micro-narrative into contemporary art. So this is, of course, one thing that is very important for me. But if I want to talk about macro or micro-narration, I think the very important things that we have to discuss before entering into the notion of micro is macro, is the grand narration. So my argument usually is that we don't know what is grand narration because we take it for granted. So, and the other things that's very interesting for me is the relationality, connectivity, and the intersectionality between macro and micro. So always I think that, we take it for granted that we know what is macro because, of course it's grand, it's very much visible. But grand narration or macro narration is absolutely invisible in hypervisibility. It's everywhere. You see it everywhere, and you take it for granted, and you think that okay, so of course it's a kind of natural phenomenon. You don't really question that because, of course, there is something happening. Of course, that grand narration is actually kind of maybe in an exaggerated word, colonize the way that we are thinking. So maybe the first step in order to understand what is macro narrative is to understand what is grand narration. So, and after that, of course, you could challenge the idea. So this is actually interesting for me to kind of explore that what is happening in that relationship between macro and micro. the very smallest spot.
Maybe as a start of our little conversation here, maybe you can tell us a few words about the work that we show on this occasion, which is called A Short Story About a Cat, and is well, you told me that this is some kind of visit card for your practice. What do you mean by that, and how is this connected with like the macro narratives? And because it's obvious it is some kind of micro narrative, but it also contains some kind of indication of a macro politicized narrative.
Yeah, it's true. Basically, the work is the very 2 minutes or 1 minute of one long documentary film, which was about war between Iran and Iraq in 1984. And the documentary basically started in 1984, and the narration goes to 1990s. So basically, it was narrated the whole conflict in the region, specifically about relationship between Iran and Iraq. And I was watching that documentary, and suddenly I saw the very small part that in the middle of the war, that I guess that is Iranian part, which, based on the form of guns that they're using and form of custom that they have, I imagine that it could be Iranian part. In the middle of battlefield, there's a cat is escaping. So I present it as a kind of like a visit card for my work, because it's I'm very much working with materiality of the history. I'm very working with archive. I'm very much interested in the storytelling. I'm very much interested in micro-narrations, as the way that we are discussing right now. And also the other thing that is very important for me, the agonistic relationship between macro and micro, that somehow this very short story about a cat presents that agonistic relationship. You know about the war, even I think that even the director or filmmaker of that documentary didn't really notice that cat is escaping. So, and of course, it creates some sort of nice gesture into the idea of grand narration of the war, that what is happening. Yeah. So I'm not really in that film completely different compared to the other works that I do, because it's very short. I'm not really exploring about what happened for the cat. So this actually could be another interesting exploration, but I'm presenting the cat that is escaping. So we have the grand narration of order of the war, that we know that how is it possible to present it in, for example, in the documentary scale. There is a battlefield, there is a kind of showing the conflict, and then suddenly, accidentally, there's another story which challenge the idea of the actual war. So in that case, of course, it's a kind of like a visit card, because it's sort of gesture of everything that I'm interested in.
Yes, and in the sense, it was also some kind of challenge for the project you were involved while you discovered this piece. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about what you were doing, like what were you researching?
Well, my research is very much based on, there's a term that I'm trying to explore around it, that I call it hyper-politicized time, place, and body. So, and by call it hyper-politicized or hyper-politics, I somehow define the environment or time or place which has been colonized by the grand narration of hegemonic order. And this hegemonic order is somehow bring the idea of political narrativity within the social environment, which the only news that you get from them is from breaking news. So, and after that, always you say, oh, of course in the Middle East there is a war. And after I say, yes, I cannot really challenge that idea. Yes, there is a war, there is a conflict. But could we just simply follow that idea and narration and just repeating ourselves, or putting mirror in front of the mirror, or methodologically creating another form of narration in order to prove the grand narration. So it could be actually some sort of challenge about the notion of microhistory, because there is some sort of, in my point of view, the falsehoodness regarding to the way that some scholars define microhistory, which is the microhistory is the small branch of macro history, which I challenge that idea, because I think if we just follow the small stories without thinking the relationality that the small story has with grand narration, we are not really doing anything. So we are just proving the idea that everybody knows.
But how is this how is this relationship reflected in the work itself? I realized that at some point there is really annoying sound, so it's really filling the room, and it's very, very powerful, and you can't really go next to it. So does this has to do with your view, like is this relation between micro and macro narrative also reflected in the work itself?
Somehow I try to materialize. Of course, it's a kind of like a simple attempt to materialize that. The best way that I found to work with the idea of hyperpolitics is from the perspective of artistic research. So this is the long-term exploration, long-term discussion. But in my work, for example, my previous question was, of course, it's a part of the small part of the bigger project, which I was looking at the Swedish television. I was digging the archive of Swedish television from 1976, when multiculturalism started to be practiced in Sweden until 2011, that I have the archive. So I was working with the archive from Swedish television, state television, and this is the British documentary films, but they presented in 1984 in television, in Swedish television. And I was just looking at the notion of how media has presented the hyper-politicized social environment in that sense. And so it's not very strange to see that, of course, the things that we know about Middle East is based on war, based on lack of human rights, especially against women. And revolution plays a very important role. And of course, recently nuclear deal. So, and everything, of course, is somehow connected to those keywords. So we cannot really disregard. And I agree. Of course, you have to be conscious about the way that you're discussing, and you cannot simply disregard your political agency as an artist and just start to talk about something else. But it's not something else. I call it elseness. And the elseness is actually the potentiality of being something else. And that potentiality of being something else has a critical and agonistic identity, which always try to create some sort of negotiation and try to question that taking for granted the notion of grand narration, in order to bring in other things. Because I believe those kind of hyper-politicized social environment, such as Middle East, or in different conditions, of course, you can see that is happening. It has the complexity of that environment has a lot of potentials in order to be discovered within the realm of contemporary art, and we cannot simply simplifying the conflict. So maybe in that sense, micro-narratives doesn't try to simplify the complexity, neither complexify simplicity. So we try actually kind of...
let's try to simplify the discussion. Well, no, I'm sorry, it was just... I'm a bit tired, so it's a bit... But I wanted to ask you two things, like how do you feel in Sweden, and what do you do there? Because I know that you're like a PhD researcher at Konstfack, which is a very well-known institution, like art institution in Sweden. And I would also like to ask you about how you first encountered Romania, because here we are like taught that Middle East is very far away, and there is like media blockage. So there is no, but actually if you turn off this FM, like radio FM scale, and you put it on the long range, you will like immediately immerse in a world of sounds which is completely unknown to us, but it's actually very close. And it happened to me several times that I couldn't find any FM radio, and then I'm like browsing around on this radio scale and like I don't know, encounter very, very specific Middle Eastern sounds. So it's actually it's much closer than they tell us that it is. So
yes.
We also encounter that closeness in the way we cook and in the way we. So there are more similarities, I think, but we are taught to regard ourselves as like separated by some really big wall.
I think the very important question in that sense is when the idea of internationalism became culturalist. So this is actually the main problem, because of course we share a lot of things, and this notion of sharing is not new, really. It started from a long time ago, historical background, Ottoman Empire, etc., etc. If you look at grand narration of historical order, you see a lot of relationality in that sense. But it's not just about that. As you mentioned, the way that you're living, for example, Romania, if you look at it from outside, there's two grand narrations, or one very specific grand narration, that there was a communist past, there was a revolution 1989, and everything was fine. But everything is not fine. So, and after that, there is some sort of a stereotypical narrations in order to define what is happening there. So the kind of the definition of Balkan, which is blood and honey. So always, is embedded in the social and political identity of Romania. So we have honey part, but it's bloody. So you can see it, of course. So, but it's very important to know again, the things that you immediately, the idea, the image that immediately came to your mind is actually is from somewhere. You know that. And after that, challenging that idea needs, of course, micro-scale investigation in order to discover something else. And that something else actually creates solidarity. That elseness creates solidarity. That elseness suggests the idea that, well, we are actually part of darker nations. The darker nations are the nations that they're, colonized by the grand narration of political order in order to define the others. And of course, defining the others doesn't have any problem, but otherizing others in order to create self-identity is problematic. So basically, in Sweden, I'm trying to challenge the same idea. That you cannot really otherize the other. We have to try to find solidarity. We have to find the similar form of memory, identity, which actually connect us, not separate us. And of course, sounds very romantic, but yeah, let's be romantic in that sense, because of course, again, the question is very important to raise that when internationalism became culturalist. There's a hypothesis. There's different hypotheses about that. There's a specific time for that. There's a suggestion that what happened really in that period of time, which was mid-70s. And of course, that notion of diversity, which in the beginning, sounded very kind of affable and interesting has become the sort of excuse in order to divide the others and make the division between them. And also, of course, in the global political or social identity that, the word is claiming, the representation of outside and outside, there is actually a representation of inside and inside. And the object of the mirror are closer to you than you expected all the time. That's why as soon as you see that, you see the relationality. For example, there is a cinema outside. Outside Transit.
Cinema Republica,
So basically, this is the cinema that I have in memory, because the cinema in Tehran was designed by the same aesthetical attitude. So it shows actually what happened during the 60s, 70s. And there was a very strong, neighborhood that I grew up in Iran, in Tehran, was very much sort of brutalism. So when I'm in the Eastern Bloc, always I think that I can immediately recognize myself. It's kind of like a strange nostalgia that I have about the urban planning because it reminds me of my home. So and it's very strange to see that.
So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for the interview and
when you're tired, you ask complicated questions.
Oh my God!
Be tired.
Thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you so much. Thank you.